Welcome to the FSBC Librarian presents Ficlets for Fans. So this came about because I didn't want to waste my podcast subscription and figured instead of doing one interview a month or every couple of weeks, I would start turning short ficlets into podfics. And then maybe, have a chat with somebody afterwards, like the person who wrote them or who it was written for, or someone who read it and just wanted to talk about it. As you do. Not that I'm crazy or anything. So I had a couple of suggestions to start with. And the first one is going to be a fic from Oh, I Swear, called Halloween Miracle. Please excuse my Aussie accent. I am very well aware it's going to sound very different to anything. I'm going to try not to pull too many funny voices, but either way, this is an experience for everybody, for me, for the listeners, whoever's silly enough to listen to it. And I think that'll do for an intro. So, A Halloween Miracle by Oh, I Swear, for Alaskan Outsider. As he stands on the doorstep of his sister's house, Bucky sighs. It's Halloween night, and he could be anywhere right now. Ideally, he'd be inside of his tiny apartment, ordering a pizza, watching horror movies, and ignoring the world. He wouldn't be standing here in a Captain America costume, waiting to take his niece and nephew trick-or-treating. And it's not that he doesn't adore his niece and nephew, because of course he does. Hell, it's a family joke with perhaps a little basis in truth, that Bucky was every bit as excited to become an uncle as Scott had been to become a father when Becca had announced her first pregnancy. No, it's the fact that Bucky just doesn't do fancy dress. He tried to get out of it, really. He'd suggested that he'd just wear normal clothes and chaperone, but his little niece Caitlin had been adamant that he couldn't get away with that. And so here he was. He raises a hand and knocks, hoping to God that the first few places they go to are generous so the kids are happy and this is over with quickly. From behind the door, he hears the unmistakable sound of little feet thundering excitedly towards the door, before the slower movement of his sister asking them to move out of the way, please, and let me get through. He can't help but smile, because when he and Bex had been kids, they'd been no different. The door lock clicks then, and the handle moves, and he sees his sister's tired-looking face. At 8 months pregnant, though, it's hardly a surprise. In fact, with Scott doing the night shift as an EMT, that's why Bucky's been roped into trick-or-treating this evening. It's hardly fair to ask someone so heavily pregnant to walk through the neighbourhood and up and down apartment building stairs. Bounding past her mother, Caitlin launches herself at Bucky's legs, wrapping her skinny little arms around them. Uncle Bucky, you made it! And you dressed up! Hey, Squirt, he says, ruffling her hair affectionately and getting a squawk of indignation for his troubles from the little girl. Yeah, well, I couldn't let my best girl and my best little guy down, huh? He asks, laughing and smiles. Your nephew joins his sister, never one to be left out. Nuh-uh, Caitlin agrees emphatically. That wide smile still spread across her little face. And all right. Even a grumpus like Bucky has to admit, perhaps it is a little bit worth it. Wow, you did pull out the stops, Becca says, now that she can get a word in edgeways. Rental rather than Target, and a shield that's not just a painted trash can lid. Of course she's teasing. Bucky had pretended to be Steve Rogers when they were kids, and really had painted a trash can lid to kind of look like the shield. He gives her a grin. Yes, saving heavily pregnant sisters from trekking around the streets of Brooklyn on a chilly October evening. All in a day's work, ma'am, he says, giving her a mock salute. I could do this all day, he adds for good measure, getting an eye roll for his efforts. You really are such a dork, she says, shaking her head. Right then, monsters, go and get your buckets, and remember, no knocking doors if they don't have decorations. In fact, Uncle Bucky is in charge. He'll tell you which ones you can. I'm not a monster, Caitlin argues, crossing her arms and scowling in a way that's so like Becca, Bucky almost laughs. I'm the Black Widow. And I'm Iron Man, Miles chimes in. Becca laughs and sighs. Right then, Black Widow and Iron Man, Let's go and do what Mummy said, huh? Thankfully, the kids don't need more encouragement than that, and they barrel back inside, laughing and squabbling as they go, heading off into the depths of the house. Seriously though, Buck, thank you so much for this. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I thought I was going to have two seriously disappointed kids when Scott said he had to work, she confides, and Bucky smiles. You know I'd do anything for those two. Though, Bex, are you sure you want to leave your kids with your mega little brother? He says, and he's being honest. He really does love those kids like they're his own. But the fact does remain that despite being a guy, he's an omega, and it's really not too late to go back to his original plans. I know. It's why I trust you and why you're their favourite uncle. And because I trust you and you're their favourite uncle, I'm more than happy to let you loose with them, she says fondly, rubbing at the large bump under her shirt. I'm their only uncle, he points out, though this little spar is old material, really. Well, that probably helps, she says, automatically taking the bright red wig that Caitlin has in her hands and fitting it over the top of her actual hair. There we go, just like Natasha Romanoff. Your disguise is finished, she says with flourish. And Caitlin laughs as Bucky checks Miles over and grabs his little hand. Right, come on then, kiddos. Let's get this show on the road, Bucky says cheerfully. Uncle Bucky, we're not kiddos tonight. We're superheroes, Miles tells him seriously. And Bucky laughs and nods. Of course you are. Of course you are, Iron Man. Come on, he says, giving Becca a small final wave and leading the kids off down the street. It's really not long before the kids are in ridiculously high spirits and have their sweet-carrying buckets more than half full. It probably helps that they're cute. And even Bucky has gained himself a few cheek pinches and bits of candy from the well-meaning old ladies of the neighbourhood. Guess this isn't so bad, he thinks to himself as he pops a Reese's peanut butter pumpkin into his mouth hole and chews it, letting his mouth fill with the sweet taste of peanuts and chocolate, even if it means he can't actually talk until he's done. So far, they've stuck to the houses of the neighbourhood rather than braving any apartments because they tend to be the ones with most of the decor up. Bucky has always been taught only to knock at doors where people seem to, in the spirit of the things, or those are people they knew anyway, so as not to scare the elderly and unprepared. So that's exactly what he was trying to instill into Caitlin and Miles as they moved around. I'm the queen of Halloween, Caitlin sings as she bounces along next to Bucky, who still has a hold of Miles' hand and he can't help but chuckle. Come on then, Your Highness, here's your next one, he says, leading them up the steps and going through the routine again. Really, despite the fact that he hadn't been keen on this expedition, he knows he's kind of getting into the swing of things. And of course, that definitely means it's high time something went wrong. After the lady behind that door had given them both a fair number of marshmallow ghosts, and really, Bucky did not envy his sister and Scott dealing with the hyperactivity this amount of sugar was sure to bring. Both of the kids were looking pretty pleased, and even better, their buckets were looking fairly full. Right, guys, I think it's about time we thought about getting you back to your mum, Bucky says, glancing at his watch, and yeah, there's another reason right now. Oh, but Uncle Bucky, Caitlin starts, clearly about to try and start negotiations with him that Bucky is simply not willing to have. Nope, come on, he says insistently, giving her what he hopes is at least a close approximation of the look, which was a facial expression his and Becca's mum had perfected during their childhood. One more, Miles tries, and really, they have got this older sister, younger brother tag team down. Bucky would wonder where they got it from, but he absolutely knows that he and Becky used to do exactly the same. He sighs dramatically. Oh, all right, one more. But both of the children cheer. Caitlin grabs Miles' hand now, and before Bucky has a chance to hold onto him tighter, he's let go, and they're off. Bucky swears, wondering why the bloody hell this costume had to come with shoe covers because, really, they impede his ability to run. But then again, most people don't have to sprint wearing the Halloween costume. Thankfully, the kids don't seem to be on a wild dash, but they are heading towards a house that is void of decor and doesn't belong to anyone they know. Really? Bucky been talking to himself all evening? And he shouts out to stop them, but apparently Iron Man and Black Widow have no intention of listening to Captain America, despite his being, well, Cap, because they're there now, and Miles is knocking on the damn door. All Bucky can actually do is skid up behind them and make it look like these kids are actually supervised in some way, shape, or form, because they are, and or hope this house is empty because it looks a little bit like it might be. Right, guys, come on, it looks like, he starts. But then there are footsteps behind the door, and Bucky finds himself cringing as it opens, looking up to meet the poor person behind the door's eyes, and swearing again. Uncle Bucky, Caitlin admonishes, Mummy told you not to use that word. But Bucky isn't paying attention. Bucky isn't paying attention because Bucky is staring. I'm sorry, mister. Hey, you have the same costume as my Uncle Bucky. Yours looks better, though, she informs the man, and all Bucky can think is, of course, this guy has a superior costume to his because his isn't a stupid rental costume. Because unless Bucky is very much mistaken, the man who has come out from behind that door is actually Captain America. Oh, now, I don't know about that, he says kindly before scratching the back of his head. So, I guess it's Halloween, huh? His cornflower blue eyes look up to meet Bucky's, and Bucky does everything in his power not to say anything stupid or just make incoherent noises, because that would be super fucking embarrassing in front of Steve Rogers, who also happens to be Bucky's childhood crush. Uncle Bucky, Caitlin says in a stage whisper, you need to answer the nice man. That just about shakes Bucky out of his stupor, and just in time for him to realise that in his efforts not to look like a complete idiot, all he's accomplished is looking like an even bigger idiot. Fantastic. I'm sorry, Captain America. My Uncle Bucky is busy pulling the face our mum teases him for pulling when he thinks an alpha is pretty. You are an alpha, right? Caitlin asks, clearly deciding that Bucky can't even take the reins. And maybe she's right, given he's still yet to answer. Caitlin, remember what you've been taught about not asking people their designations, he says, scolding her lightly. Sorry, sir, and thank you for your service. And we were trick-or-treating and they sort of ran, and I told them not to go to houses that weren't decorated, and oh, for God's sakes, he's gone from mute idiot to babbling idiot in about 30 seconds flat. He shuts his mouth, teeth almost audibly clacking together as his cheeks flush bright red. Luckily, instead of staring at him like he's completely insane, Steve Rogers is standing there with a mildly bemused expression on his gorgeous face. Well, miss, yes, I am an alpha, he says, bending slightly to bridge the gap between his height and Caitlin's, which really shouldn't be as endearing as it is. It should be illegal to have shoulders that broad, Bucky thinks as he does, his width in front of Caitlin's slight form making them all the more noticeable. And your uncle's a very good-looking Omega too. Bucky feels like his face is going to set itself on fire and he has no idea what to do. If he has any luck, the floor will open and swallow him whole. In fact, he would love it if that were to happen right about now. It looks like your trick-or-treat has been going well, he continues, that deep voice sounding pleased and interested, despite the fact that really it would have served them right if he just slammed the door in their faces. It has. Apparently, we're the cutest Black Widow and Iron Man Mrs. Reynolds has ever seen, she informs him enthusiastically, and his laugh comes low and somehow warms Bucky from the inside out. Do you know Mrs. Reynolds? Well, having met the real ones, I can only tell you she's right. And no, I don't know Mrs. Reynolds. It sounds like she's pretty astute. And as for your uncle, well, I think he pulls off the cap suit almost better than I do, he says, and he's looking at Bucky again. Now, as it's Halloween, give me a few minutes. And with that, he disappears back into the house, giving Bucky just enough time to try and come down from whatever internal crisis he might be having right about now and try and get the blush off his cheeks. Uncle Bucky, Miles asks, moving back and tugging at Bucky's hand now. Why does that man say you look better than he does? Miles, Caitlin, Bucky starts, bending so he's on the kid's level now, just like Captain America himself had done just a couple of minutes before. He said that because he's actually Steve Rogers. He's Captain America. Miles' eyes go wide. Whoa, he says before staring excitedly at the door. Like the one from the movies? Well, yes, the actual one from the movies, Bucky confirms, looking back at the door himself, because how the hell did he just live here in the same neighborhood as Bucky's sister? Of course, everyone knew that Steve Rogers had been a Brooklyn native when he was young. But didn't the Avengers all live in that fancy compound these days? Surely he didn't just have a house in the middle of suburban New York. Cool, Caitlin declares in a stage whisper, just as Captain America comes back to the door clutching a couple of packages. Sorry, it's not much, but it's all I've got, he says, offering the kids some red licorice. I keep it in because it reminds me of home. Well, this is home, I guess, but the time I knew and all, oh, geez, way to sound every bit as old as I am. He looks a bit bashful as he does, though Caitlin and Miles take the candy appreciatively and add it to their buckets. Bucky can't help but feel slightly endeared that Steve keeps licorice as his candy of choice, because it was around in the 40s. It's on brand for the image he's built up in his head, and it's kind of gratifying to reconcile the two things together. Or it would be if Bucky was anywhere near over the shock of having actually met the guy. Thank you so much. This is really kind, Bucky says. Glad it doesn't sound too awkward as he does. And sorry for coming and crashing your evening in. Yeah, well, it's probably a good thing. I would have slept right through, and these days, too much sleep makes me pretty grumpy, he says, looking bashful again, like he's admitting some kind of secret. I'm the opposite, not a morning person, and completely useless without enough sleep, Bucky replies before blushing again, because was he really speaking about his sleep schedule and inadequacies if he didn't get enough right now? Whatever he'd imagined what might happen if he ever met the real Steve Rogers, it definitely didn't involve conversations about what an arsehole Bucky was first thing in the morning. But then again, they also never involved the presence of Caitlin and Miles, and never once in his wildest fantasies had he been dressed in his goddamn imitation Cap costume. Steve gives him a small, soft smile. At this point, I feel like it would be more normal if I were like that too. There's a pause then, and Bucky clears his throat. Well, thanks. And thanks for indulging the kids, he says honestly. It's no problem, he replies, and something in both his expression and his eyes make Bucky know that he means it. Neither of them move. Bucky starts, and Steve chuckles, moving the scratch to the back of his head. As he does, Bucky catches a waft of alpha smell, something like freshly cut grass and autumn apples, and he can't help but smile because it seems kind of seasonal, tonight being Halloween and all. Yeah, Steve starts at the same time, and they both chuckle. Listen, Bucky, is it? Steve asks, and Bucky can't help but laugh. James, actually. Bucky comes from my middle name, and it's what my friends call me, he explains quickly, aware that his nickname is just a little bit childish, but it's always just stuck. And sure, it might be crazy to be worried about a damn name, but he feels like he needs to give context, if only because it's so ridiculous. Again, Steve smiles at him. Right. Would you prefer I called you James? I mean, if you're more comfortable, Bucky starts, and Steve shakes his head. It feels for a moment distinctly like something is going to happen. Unless Bucky is now completely delusional, and really it's a possibility, there's tension to the air which suggests that something is afoot. But then the whole thing is broken, and in rather spectacular fashion. Let it never be said that Bucky's niece and nephew don't have a sense of timing. Uncle Bucky, Miles needs to go potty, and it's getting cold. Can we go home now? Caitlin asks, coming back over and tugging at Bucky's hand in the way that kids always do to get attention. Yeah, we should, he says, looking back at Steve goddamn Rogers apologetically. Yeah, you should. Listen, it was good to meet you all, he says, looking about as bashful as Bucky feels, and Bucky wants to stop and analyse why and make a whole thing out of this like he normally would, but he knows that once a small child needs the bathroom, he has limited time to react before there is a disaster to deal with. And you, he says softly, before letting himself be led away. You did not meet Captain America. If Steve Rogers lived in our neighbourhood, don't you think I'd know about it already? If nothing else, I'd be aware because I'd want to tease you. Do you remember how at one stage your bedroom at Mum and Dad's was basically a shrine to him because he was your first big alpha crush? Come on, I'm your sister. Of course I'd have capitalised on that, Becca says, sitting with her swollen feet up now that they're home, and Miles has gone to the bathroom and Bucky has somehow convinced the kids to stop eating candy and go to bed. We absolutely did. You can ask Caitlin and Miles, he argues back, unwrapping a gummy spider, individually biting off every one of its legs before popping its body in his mouth hole. Right, because waking up my two children to ask if you met Captain America on our goddamn street is reasonable, she scoffs, shaking her head. Anyway, how do I know you just haven't bribed them to say what you want? Why would I? Bucky asks, looking at her scornfully. I honestly have no idea, but it wouldn't be the first time I failed to understand your motives, she replies dryly. And Bucky snorts, chucking a candy shaped like an eyeball at her, which she deftly catches, opens, and shoves in her own mouth. Bucky really wasn't kidding when he said that Caitlin and Miles were just carbon copies of himself and Becca in their younger years. Uncle Bucky! Caitlin's voice comes across the schoolyard as she speeds towards him, little feet slapping against the asphalt as she runs towards him. Uncle Bucky, why are you here? Where's Mum? Bucky laughs, scooping her up and spinning her around before depositing her back on her own feet. Your mum can't be here because she's having the baby, so she sent me instead. Hope that's okay. She's having the baby? Miles, Mum's having the baby. We're going to have a sister, she informs him, little voice still apparently completely stuck on high volume, which was pretty standard. Nuh-uh, we're going to have a brother, not a boring sister, Miles insists, coming over to join them. No, we had a brother last time. Well, I did. That's you, she informed him, and Bucky considered for just a second whether he should say it didn't work like that before deciding it wasn't worth it. Either way, there was going to be one potentially disillusioned sibling, and really, that felt like it was more in Becca and Scott's remit to deal with it than his. There were definitely some advantages to being their uncle rather than their parent. But I've never had a brother, Miles complains, and Bucky decides to bust up this little argument before it has any further chance to escalate. Think of it this way, you might be the only brother, he says. Oh, was your mum's only brother? Was a pretty cool thing to happen? Oh, Miles says, looking much happier about it. You're right. Hey, Uncle Bucky, are we going to your apartment? No, we're going to your house, and if Daddy doesn't make it back tonight, I'm going to have to stay with you there. You know there's not enough space at my place now you're both getting so big, he tells them, and they both grin and laugh. So what you're saying is it's like a slumber party? Caitlin asks, and her tone is ever so slightly calculating, enough to make Bucky look up at her, instantly a little suspicious. Sort of, I guess, but not a real one, because tonight's still a school night, he replies, and she grins at him all the same. Is it real enough that we get to have pizza for dinner, though? She asks. And now Bucky gets it. Her game is actually pretty damn clear. Bucky sighs, pretending like he's been trapped into something, even if actually he's relieved because, especially for an Omega, his cooking skills, well, they leave something to be desired. Perhaps that's just another reason he's still single. You drive a hard bargain, little Miss Lang, he tells her, and she giggles at him in response, slotting her little hand into one of his that he offers, grabbing Miles with the other. How about we talk about it on the way back home? She's laughing now, and the sound makes Bucky smile. I'll do my homework first without even complaining, she promises. I'm holding you to that, he tells her seriously. Later that evening, Bucky has bundled the kids into their winter coats once again, taking them to the pizza place now that the homework is done and the evening is calm. He's heard from Scott to say things are going well, but Bucky isn't an uncle yet again. And it definitely looks like babysitting duties are going to extend overnight. Bucky's not too worried about that, though. So we need a barbecue chicken, the one with the sweet corn. Oh, and the one with the bacon and pepperoni. And Miles, what do you want? And we need garlic bread and wings, Caitlin lists off loudly. And Bucky can't help but laugh because he knows that even with his appetite, which definitely isn't as bird-like a delicate as an Omega's appetite is meant to be, they're not going to get through all of that. Okay, garlic bread is a must, and I agree about the chicken wings. Miles, we get hot wings or Texas barbecue? He asks, aware that his nephew is probably struggling to get a word in edgeways with his sister and her exuberance. Hot wings, he says, and it's pretty predictable. For such a little kid, Miles has had has always had a weird tolerance to spice. Right, so garlic bread, hot wings, Bucky confirms as they turn the corner into the street where his favourite pizza place sits. Sure, they could have ordered for delivery, but this way he's taken the kids and himself for a walk. And beyond that, this place is always busy and delivery waits are long. If he can manage it, he wants the kids in bed at a reasonable time. And do we want more chicken on our pizza if we're having wings? How about we get a 4 cheese and a meat feast? He asks, knowing it's basic as far as choices go, but classics are classic for a reason. Okay, Caitlin agrees, and Miles nods, swinging the hand of Bucky's that he's holding. Right, we have our plan of attack, Bucky laughs, opening the door of the shop, and something in here smells amazing. And not in the way that fried food and baked dough with delicious sauce and cheese smells amazing. He swallows, feeling annoyed but how aware of his designation he is at that moment, and more annoyed that the scent is familiar for some reason, though he can't put his finger on why. What's wrong? Caitlin stage whispers in the most obvious way possible as they step inside, clearly having noticed Bucky's expression. Nothing, he starts, but then he's immediately interrupted. Hey, it's that guy, the one with the other cap costume, Miles says, looking up. And oh, yes. Well, that would explain the seductively outdoorsy scent that's all Bucky can smell right now. That apple and fresh cut grass is familiar for a reason. Oh, hi, you guys, he says, giving them a kind smile. And Bucky too. Yeah, Uncle Bucky's having a slumber party with us because Mummy's having another baby, and I think it's a sister, but Miles thinks it's going to be another brother, Caitlin informs him brightly. And you can't have a slumber party without pizza, right? I've never really had many slumber parties, but you're probably right, he says with a sheepish smile. And pizza is always a good idea. You have good taste, she informs him discerningly, and something about it makes all of them laugh, breaking any tension in the moment. Thank you, he says, answering the little girl, but his eyes are fixed on Bucky, whose stomach is flip-flopping embarrassingly and a heat spreading through his body like a full body blush. Uncle Bucky, are you gonna order the pizza? Caitlin asks him. And really, it's a good thing that she's reminded him of why they're here, or he would probably make the situation so much worse by standing and staring, quite possibly until the end of time. Yeah, you're right, he says, turning back to the rather spotty kid behind the counter and places their order before standing back out of the way so the next patron can get there, finding himself standing right next to Steve. This close, his scent is even more all-encompassing. It's all that Bucky can really pay attention to, and he knows that his own scent is reacting to the comfort of desirable, compatible alpha in such close proximity. Oh, Steve says softly, looking at Bucky now, an odd expression on his face, and just for a second, Bucky wonders if Steve had noticed. If he has, he's surely been polite about it, more polite than Bucky deserves. Obviously, accidentally catching the sense of others can't always be avoided, but it's still not considered to be polite. Sorry, Bucky says quietly, and he shakes his head. No, I should be apologising. It's just been a really long time since, he starts, before stopping and blushing. Wait. Oh, it's okay. Wait, he asks, a little dumbfounded. This is both of... Mr. Rogers, sir, the teen behind the counter says, offering across what looks like 3 large pizza boxes. Your order's ready. He looks every bit as starstruck and enamored as Bucky feels, and Bucky can't blame him. Metabolism. I have to eat a whole lot, he's saying now, turning it back. I'd lie and say I was feeding other people, but you know I live alone. I'm not judging, he says softly, catching the sense of embarrassment now and wondering whether it's Steve or him or both. It certainly seems like both of them, but Bucky knows he's an old romantic and prone to wishful thinking. Oh, okay. I'm glad, because do you think our uncle is pretty? Miles asks him. And in that moment, Steve's embarrassment flares, and so does Bucky's, and he's sure that between the pair of them, they're absolutely stinking out the whole place, but there's nothing for it now. Miles, Bucky hisses, but Steve shakes his head. I think he's beautiful, he replies instead, and Miles nods sagely in a way that only a small child can really manage. Well then, mister, I think you should be telling him, not me. He doesn't have an alpha, and that's a real shame because he's the best uncle I know. But you can only be his alpha if you promise to look after him like my daddy does for my mummy, he informs him. And Bucky mentally vows never to babysit ever again because this is genuinely the most mortifying experience he's ever been through, and it's completely the fault of his niece and nephew. Steve Rogers looks almost as horrified as Bucky feels, and for a second, Bucky wonders if he's actually having a heart attack or an aneurysm or a stroke or something else because it feels simultaneously like his heart is about to beat out of his chest and that the world has completely stopped spinning. He looks up at Bucky then and gives him a small smile. The kid's right. I should grow some balls and tell you you're beautiful. And you are, by the way. By now, Bucky is definitely sure that he's died, and this is some weird version of the afterlife, or he's fallen into an alternate dimension. Like, they have aliens now. Surely it's not that far out. Or perhaps he's just plain dreaming because he's fairly sure that Steve Rogers, his childhood crush, the most gloriously alpha he's ever seen, is standing in front of him, telling him that he's beautiful. And it might be a bit soon for me to even think about being your alpha, but maybe it's not too soon to ask for something else instead. Maybe we could have coffee sometime? He asked softly. I'm gonna kick myself forever if I let an Omega who sent Is This Compatible pass me by again. Rocky blinks, wondering if he just heard that right. Did he just get asked out? Did he really just get asked out standing in the middle of the local pizza place by Steve Rogers? And they're commenting on each other's scent now, meaning it wasn't just him inventing this? Uncle Bucky, Miles says, tugging at his hand now. This is the part where you gotta say yes. Yes, coffee, yes, he exclaims. And if he could see Caitlin's face, he might see that she's looking at him like he's an absolutely giant dope, and perhaps he is. But right now, all he can focus on is the gorgeous smile on Steve's face, spreading across it like sunshine and lighting it up the same way. Uncle Bucky, you need to give him your phone. He can put in his number, Caitlin suggests. And Bucky looks at her then and laughs, unable to help himself, because actually, she's right. So, I think I owe you an apology, Becca says. They're sitting in her and Scott's living room, late on Christmas Eve, both holding a cup of mulled wine, whilst an Omega Flick Christmas movie plays oddly in the background. What for this time? He asks, laughing as Becca sticks her tongue out at him. Because I remember ridiculing you when you said that you and my 2 children met Captain America on Halloween, and telling you that you didn't, she replies. And I know when to eat humble pie. Like when Steve Rogers is in your house and maybe definitely upstairs reading bedtime stories to said kids, he asks, because yes, that's definitely what's happening right now. Bucky knows for a fact he's been gone so long because Caitlin will absolutely have conned him into a second story, and she'll almost certainly have gone for a third as well. Like then, she agrees, smiling across at him. He's your own Christmas miracle, right? Halloween miracle, more like, Bucky corrects, and she laughs, taking a good sip of her drink. Yeah, but it doesn't quite have the same ring to it, she says softly. And Bucky laughs, looking over his shoulder as he hears footsteps approaching. Hey, you two, Steve says, coming back into the living room, bringing that wonderful woodsy smell with him and sitting down next to Bucky on the love seat, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. His lips pressed to the side of Bucky's head. What are you talking about? How my children totally blew any matchmaking efforts I ever made for Bucky out of the water completely, Becca sighs before standing up. She'd both like another drink. I anticipate the kids getting up at least 4 more times before we get them down properly, and that's without counting Eva needing feeding. Sure, Bucky says idly, handing over his mug. Thank you, Steve agrees, leaning over and handing his own over and pressing his lips to Bucky's now. Bucky's stomach flipping like it did every damn time as he tucked himself against this gorgeous man who might hopefully one day actually become his alpha. Thanks for helping with the kids. I know Becca appreciates it, Bucky says softly when he pulls away, not moving far away from Steve at all, lips still brushing as they whisper. It felt cozy and soft, and Bucky feels that connection from it. It's no problem. I like kids, he says softly. Something about that just melting Bucky inside. Bucky loved kids, and he knew he wanted them one day. Perhaps, although that would have to be sometime in the future. Besides, we owe those two. We do, Bucky agrees, leaning and kissing his man again, listening to the soft, happy noise that he makes in his throat as he did. All right, I should break this up, but it's Christmas Eve. Enjoy your soppy shit, and I'll just put your drinks down here for when you're done, Becca says, sounding more exasperated than actually annoyed. Bucky laughs softly and pulls back, kissing Steve softly once more. Now that is the Christmas miracle, he says with a smile, and Steve smiles back at him. I think you mean a Halloween miracle, he says, and Bucky laughs in agreement and kisses him again just because he can. The end. And